So Edward Snowden, who, I think his leaks of this NSA stuff was very important, and important for both in its, sort of direct material implications, but also in terms of like creating at least a toehold of skepticism and scrutiny of these agencies. Also, I got on Twitter over the past couple of days to prove that just because you did one thing that is good doesn't mean that your opinions necessarily hold any water. Look, the guy's a libertarian, and there are impulses that libertarians have that I sometimes find myself in agreement with. Like, yes, we should decriminalize and legalize drugs. And yes, we shouldn't have as much war and expenditures, et cetera, to the extent that they actually believe that. And also, I think, with some of them, there's a healthy skepticism of police. And again, some, because a lot of them are, but the defining aspect of libertarianism is a belief that you are on your own. And at the end of the day, the only thing that really should determine outcomes in life for members of I don't even know if I would call this a society, is at the end of the day, just money or power, which is a function of money in their world. And so the real problem, he tweeted out something to the effect of like, I don't know why people are so afraid of libertarians. All they want to do is leave you alone. That sounds great. But what leave you alone also means is they want to completely undermine society's, the functioning of society as a means in which to improve and ensure or to prevent the immiseration of its members. Here is Mike Lee, almost on cue, coming out with a speech. This newly revealed video. This is from February 2010. This is the first one, right? He's speaking to constituents in Cache Valley, Utah. This is what this guy believes.
A few years ago, when I heard President Clinton in a State of the Union address say we need to create a special visa category so that businesses can hire foreign laborers, foreign citizen laborers, to do jobs that no American would want to do. And I thought, what the heck does that mean? Sorry, I said heck again. It'll get me in trouble. I'm sure the sheriff's on his way. What does that mean that no American would want to do? I mean, we're an entrepreneurial society. Well, if the price is right, we'll take the job. And if there's no other work, we'll take a job that's sort of unpleasant. But that's not so when the government steps in and decides to be everybody's rich uncle. That tells us, hey, if you don't want to work, that's okay, you don't have to. So I don't think we're ever going to really solve the immigration problem until we solve the entitlement problem, which is the federal government should be in the entitlement business. Now, as far as the Constitution says, I suppose a state, if it wants to, like say Vermont or California, if they want to be socialist, as long as they still have a Republican form of government, it's arguable that the Constitution won't prohibit them from doing so. We could get into some deep debates about whether the Constitution would prohibit that. There are some theories upon which it would. But the big problem is getting the government, the federal government, out of that business. If a state wants to do so, it will do so to its own destruction and devastation. If California wants to be socialist, people will move away from California in droves. Oh, wait a minute, they already are doing that.
All right, let's be clear what he's talking about when he talks about entitlement. He's talking about Social Security, he's talking about Medicaid, he's talking about Medicare. And his whole argument is, it may be the case that there are Americans who don't want to do these jobs, but that's because the government is not allowing the world and life and nature to immiserate our citizens enough to put them in a position where they need to take any job that is available at any price. if you starve people long enough, that $5 an hour job starts to look pretty good. I mean, that's his argument.
That's like the Snowden thing where he says, leave me alone. Well, capitalists, if you say make it easier for people to meet their needs as far as retirement or healthcare or housing or whatever, you are taking something away from capitalists, i.e. like their motivations for getting people to serve them.
I mean, this is feudalism. This is, let's burn the crops that we planted so that our peasants are hungry enough that they're going to work for a little bit less. That's basically what he's saying. And then, of course, like on one hand, he's saying we give too much to people. That's why they're not going out and working at these jobs. And then he's also saying, but if these states give too much to their people, people are going to move out.
Right.
It's a little bit contradictory, but just in case he wasn't explicit enough on what he's going to do to things like Social Security, here's another clip. This is clip number 7, right? Yeah.
That's what entitlement programs are. They are wealth redistribution. For generations now, we've had generations that have been born, lived their entire lives, and died under this sort of cradle-to-grave nanny state that we've created, in which it has been utterly taboo to even mention the term Social Security in the same sentence with reform, reduction, phase out, elimination, privatization. It's been taboo. People won't do it. I'm here right now to tell you one thing that you probably haven't ever heard from a politician. It will be my objective to phase out Social Security, to pull it up by the roots and get rid of it. People who advise me politically always tell me that's dangerous, and I tell them, in that case, it's not worth my running. That's why I'm doing this, to get rid of that. Medicare and Medicaid are of the same sort and need to be pulled up. Now, there are going to be growing pains associated with doing this. We can't do it all at once. We do have generations that are...
Can you pause it for a sec? When he says there's going to be growing pains associated with it, what he means is that people might be a little bit pissed when you steal from them. Because that's what that's what this is. Americans pay into these programs. They pay into them their whole lives. And someone like Mike Lee is saying, I want to cut them and eliminate them and steal the money that you've paid your entire lifetime into this fund.
And we should say, by growing pains, what he's also saying is dying pains. Yeah. Dying, literally.
Killing.
Literally dying pains. In other instances, it may just be hunger pains. Again, 2/3 of our elderly were in poverty when Social Security was enacted. 2/3. And he may have been bold enough to say it in a diner in 2010, what his real agenda was. And credit where credit's due. You're hearing Republicans talk about it. They're not out there campaigning on it right now, but they certainly... There's a lot of reporting on this, and they're writing it up in policies that, people aren't looking at. And short of showing this video to a focus test group, like nobody in that focus test group would believe that they're going to cut Social Security. But make no mistake about it. Go look at the Republican platform of 1936. This has been the most consistent agenda the Republican Party has had in terms of like length of time of any agenda that the Republican Party has ever held. Ridding this country of Social Security has been the single most consistent policy of the Republican Party in its existence. And he's just articulating it in this diner. Let's just keep going.
Associated with doing this, we can't do it all at once. We do have generations that have relied on this that have quasi-contractual rights in it that have expectation interest. We have to hold harmless those who are current beneficiaries. Those who have retired and are currently receiving those benefits, their benefits have to be left untouched, unchanged, unfazed. The next layer beneath them, those who will retire within the next few years, probably also have to be held harmless. At some point on the other end of the spectrum, people born after a certain date, perhaps born after 1970, as I was, probably need to be told, look, you're never going to get a dime. You know, you're going to have to continue paying this tax into the system so that we can continue to afford it for those to whom we've committed irrevocably to do it. But you're never going to get a dime. And then in the meantime, for everybody in between.
I would love to see that dude go on national television and say that.
Yeah, make that case.
I mean,
Yeah, bring the same energy, Mike.
it also is, I mean, aside from the fact that, like, he's not going to do that. He's too cowardly to do that. Even though it remains his agenda, it is also a psychopathic agenda.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't an argument of like, it's unsustainable, because he knows it is.
Yeah.
The fact is that even if we do not make any changes to the Social Security system, like Reagan did, for instance, when they saw the baby boom coming, or like the tweaks that have happened throughout the entire program when you realize, like, oh, in this instance, wealth inequality means that Social Security is not capturing the amount of the traditional percentage of wealth that's generated in the country in terms of touching it in terms of like taxation. Even if you don't do those tweaks, we've got at least another 8-9 years of full payouts, and then it's probably down to about 85%. So this isn't about like, we've got to cut it to save it. You don't need to cut it to save it. You don't need to cut it. Well, you don't need to. There's plenty of things you can do to increase the amount.
Raise the cap.
Raise the cap. And this guy doesn't have the guts to do it, and they don't. And because one of the things about libertarian policy is, and you can hear this in I would say, a good 30% of the debates I've done with libertarians, is that when they hit one point, they just go, well, the problem is the American public is just wrong in terms of what they want out of government.
They're dependent on this, and there will be growing pains when
But it's not just a dependency. It's saying, like, they don't want democracy. It is an anti-democratic movement at its core. You can see it with that guy. What is that guy's name? Yarvin, who is in league. Curtis Yarvin, league with the Sachs and Peter Thiel. These true libertarians, fundamentally. And if you look at the guys that came out of Mont Pelerin, they fundamentally do not believe democracy is a good system, because you get stuff like this, where people say society should be there to make sure that no one falls beneath at least a certain level of a standard of living, theoretically anyways.
But then they say it's all about just, leaving other people alone, when of course that's not the case. When you're being
non-aggression principle,
right? But when you're being left alone, you're being abandoned by your society, and it gives there's less of a buffer between, say, like capitalists that want to charge you $4 an hour to work when you're 82 because you don't have any Social Security to prevent you from being back in the labor market. Like, that is what that freedom and left alone actually entails.
There's this section from Frederick Engels, The Condition of the Working Class in England, on what he calls social murder. When one individual inflicts bodily injury upon another such that death results, we call the deed manslaughter. When the assailant knew in advance that the injury would be fatal, we call his deed murder. But when society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet a too early and unnatural death, one which is quite as much a death by violence as that by the sword or bullet, when it deprives thousands of the necessities of life, places them under conditions in which they cannot live, forces them through the strong arm of the law to remain in such conditions until the death ensues, which is an inevitable consequence, knows that these thousands of victims must perish, and yet permits these conditions to remain, its deed is murder just as surely as the deed of the single individual, disguised malicious murder against which none can defend itself, but murder it remains. I mean, that we talk about this stuff like it's just wonks trying to like figure out the right math problem, and
there are physical
sentencing people to like impoverishment and early deaths.